Good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming this evening to celebrate the end of this conference on the 120th anniversary of Rerum, Novarum, church labor, and the new things of the modern world. I'm extremely pleased tonight to announce that our speaker will be Peter Codwo Apia Cardinal Turkson. Cardinal Turkson was born in Nassau, Nsutha, in western Ghana, and studied at the seminaries of Amasano and Purdue before attending St. Anthony on the Hudson Seminary in Rensselaer, New York. I'm easier with Rensselaer, New York. It was at Rensselaer where he obtained a bachelor's degree in theology. He was ordained to the priesthood by Archbishop John Amasa on the 20th of July, 1975. Turkson was a professor at St. Teresa's Minor Seminary from 1975 to 1976, from which he went on to enter the Pontifical Biblical Institute in Rome. There he earned a licentiate in sacred scripture in 1980. He returned to St. Teresa's for a year from 1980 to 1981, and then became vice rector at St. Peter's Seminary in 1981. He also did pastoral work in a parish annexed to that seminary. In 1987, he returned to the Pontifical Bible Institute to receive his doctorate in sacred scripture, which he received in 1992. In October of 2009, Pope Benedict XVI appointed Turkson president of the Pontifical Council for Justice and Peace. Within the Roman Curia, Cardinal Turkson is also a member of the Congregation for the Evangelization of Peoples, the Congregation for Divine Worship, and the Discipline of the Sacraments. In addition, he's on the Pontifical Council for Promoting Christian Unity, the Pontifical Commission for the Cultural Heritage of the Church, and since 2010, on the Pontifical Committee for the International Eucharistic Congresses. On the 16th of October in 2010, Pope Benedict appointed Cardinal Turkson as a member for the Congregation of the Faith. I have to say a little bit of a personal note. I had the extraordinary honor last evening of having Cardinal Turkson at my home with my wife and my barking dog upstairs and Father Anietti and a few others. And it was a genuinely spiritual moment I wish I could share with all of you. One thing I learned, among others, last evening was that he was deeply committed to a career in science before receiving the call of his vocation. You shouldn't talk about these things unless you want people to report them. In fact, he turned down fellowships and scholarships to a number of American universities, including Harvard, to choose the priesthood. I also learned last evening that he's an amazing polyglot who speaks and reads 8 languages. I can barely manage with English. And my wife pointed out to me as we went to bed last night that his eyes twinkle when he laughs. Cardinal Turkson will speak to us this evening, but he will be responded to by 2 extraordinary individuals. The first of these is John J. Sweeney. I hope everyone here had an opportunity to listen yesterday to John Sweeney's powerful speech. He connected the dots. He perfectly connected the moral cause of organized labor with the Church's teachings on Rerum Novarum. I think at several points we all wanted to cheer. John Sweeney officially became President Emeritus of the AFL-CIO at the Federation's Constitutional Convention in September of 2009. Stepping down after 5 terms as president, He was first elected president in 1995 on a platform of revitalizing the Federation, which has 55 affiliated unions and an amazing 12.2 million members, including 3.2 million members in Working America, its new community affiliate. The 1995 election, by the way, was the first contested election in AFL-CIO history. At the time of his election, Sweeney was serving as president of the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, which grew from 625,000 when he first started to 1.1 million members during the 15 years of his leadership of that organization. He was also vice president of the AFL-CIO and chair of the AFL-CIO Executive Council Committees on Health Care and Organizing and Field Service, and he was first elected president of SEIU in 1980. At this time, however, I've been asked to read a statement by the university in regards to a statement that Mr. Sweeney made yesterday. It reads as follows. During his remarks about a labor issue at Catholic University that began in 1999, he implied that the then president of the Catholic University refused to engage in a dialogue with him about the matter. In fact, the president of the university, along with one of his vice presidents, met face-to-face with Mr. Sweeney to discuss the labor issue. Mr. Sweeney also stated that the conflict was between the university administration and the workers' union. In September 1999, approximately 130 CUA custodial and maintenance workers were involuntarily transferred from one union to a local of the Service Employees International Union. They protested their incorporation into SEIU, not just to the university administration, but also to the National Labor Relations Board, and petitioned the latter to decertify SEIU. The university adopted a position of neutrality over the matter of union representation, stipulating only that the workers have an opportunity to make a free choice via secret ballot election. SEIU opposed this position, pressuring the workers to accept their forcible incorporation. Eventually, when SEIU concluded that the university would not be swayed from its position, it agreed to a secret ballot election conducted by a neutral third party. The election was held on February 2, 2001, and SEIU lost. Our recollection of events differs from Mr. Sweeney's. Whatever our differences on these matters, I hope we can all agree on the following standard articulated in Rerum Novarum, paragraph 55. Those Catholics are worthy of all praise, who, understanding what the times require, have striven by various undertakings and endeavors to better the condition of the working class by rightful means. Okay. And finally, let me introduce the Most Reverend Stephen Blair, Bishop of Stockton, California. Bishop Blair was born in Los Angeles, California as the 12th of 14 children. He attended local Catholic schools in the San Fernando Valley and graduated from Queen of Angels High School Seminary in 1959. Blair then entered St. John's Seminary College in Camarillo. He was ordained to the priesthood by James Cardinal McIntyre on April 29, 1967. Much of his earlier career was spent in Catholic secondary education, initially as a teacher and administrator at Bishop Alamani High School in Mission Hills, and later as vice principal. Presidents are on my mind today. As vice principal at Bishop Amat High School in La Puente. He was principal at Bishop Alamani from 1977 to 1986, from which he became curial moderator and archdiocesan chancellor of Los Angeles. On February 17, 1990, Bishop Blair, Blair was appointed auxiliary bishop of Los Angeles and titular bishop of Lumzella by Pope John Paul II. He received his episcopal consecration on the following May 31st from Archbishop Roger Mahoney, whom we all know, with Bishop John Ward and George Zeman serving as co-consecrators. Blair was made Vicar General of Los Angeles in 1990 and assigned to Our Lady of Angels Pastoral Region in 1995. He was later named the 5th Bishop of Stockton on January 18, 1999, becoming formally installed as such on March 16th of that same year in the Cathedral of the Annunciation, which is a beautiful cathedral. I hope that you all get a chance to see it at some point. As a member of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, he has served as chairman of the Pastoral Practices Committee and as a member of the Committee for Ecumenical and Interreligious Affairs. Bishop Blair has also served locally as the president of the, served in California as the president of the California Catholic Conference. And in 2009, he was elected chair of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops Committee on Domestic Justice, Peace, and Human Development, which he continues to lead. The last time that I saw Bishop Blair was for a lovely breakfast that we had not too long ago. 120 years ago this week, in May of 1891, Pope Leo XIII released Rerum Novarum, the encyclical, I'd argue, that changed the world. Rerum Novarum, meaning of new things, became the centerpiece for all modern Catholic social teachings. It was Rerum Novarum that traced the line that linked the teachings of the apostles with the Church's engagement in the modern world, with modern society, with modern economics, with modern government and modern political life. With Rerum, the Church extended its argument for the dignity of the human person to require preferential attention to the poor, to support worker justice and unions, to understand our goods as gifts from God that we properly hold and use in light of the common good, and to an understanding that government is morally obliged to care for humankind when non-governmental efforts are insufficient. With Rerum, the Church's moral arguments about right and wrong, those arguments extend to all the laws and all the public policies and all the social and political activities of our modern life. Every pope since Leo has affirmed and enlarged this argument. Rerum Novarum is the map, literally the map, for the Church's moral engagement in our social and political life today. This is what we're gathered to celebrate yesterday and today. This is what we're gathered to celebrate tonight, Rerum Novarum's birthday. With that, Cardinal Turkson.
Let me thank you. Thank you sincerely for those words of introduction with which you invited me to this podium. This beginning part of our evening session tonight reminds me of something that happened to me just last September in New York City. Having been asked to lead the Holy See delegation to the United Nations to discuss Millennium Development Goals, on arriving at New York City, I was assigned to security officers. And I was staying at the residence of the Vatican Observer to the Holy See. So the first morning they came, of course, they wanted to know whom they had been sent to escort and to protect. So when one of the officers asked me who I was, I said, oh, I'm the altar boy in the house. So clearly not happy, not satisfied with that. He stepped out a few minutes and came back and said, now I know who you are. I just Googled you. So this evening there's been another Googling. And so you heard what they came out from the Google. But let me in the first place bring you greetings, very warm greetings from the Pontifical Council of Justice and Peace in Rome. And on his behalf, I bring you also prayerful wishes for a very successful study of Rerum Novarum this past 2 days. I'm certainly pleased, very pleased to address this meeting tonight, celebrating the 120th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, rightly considered the Magna Carta of Christian social doctrine. But I'm still glad and feel greatly honored to share the podium with America's foremost labor leader, former AFL-CIO President, the Honorable John Sweeney, as well as with His Excellency, Bishop Stephen Blair of Stockton, who's been a strong advocate of the Church's teaching on public unions. My joy is even greater because this Congress is being organized by the Catholic University of America with its very deep ties with Pope Leo XIII. Because 2 years before the promulgation of his great encyclical, Rerum Novarum, for which we gathered here tonight, Pope Leo XIII sent a letter which canonically established this university, and the title of the letter was Magni Nobis Gaudii. So it's a great joy to be here to celebrate the anniversary and this momentous document of Pope Leo XIII, a university which he canonically established with his letter. The importance of Rerum Novarum, as you just heard, is revealed in its repeated commemorations by subsequent popes and pontiffs. Concretely, for example, Pope John Paul II stated in May 13, 1981, that Rerum Novarum, he's talking about Rerum Novarum, that it came out at a date which deserves to be written in golden letters in the history of the modern church. And the reason for this is not just the importance of the question analyzed in the document, nor even the fact that it was the first encyclical on social question, but perhaps even more because it consists in the way the social question was formulated and analyzed. So Rerum Novarum offers an analysis of the social reality from the evangelical viewpoint in order to find an authentic response to it in the light of the gospel. Pope Leo XIII then gets the appropriate criteria from sacred scriptures and from the tradition of the church to solve the res novae, the new things, which happens also to be the title of this encyclical, the new emerging social situations and conditions of humanity in the light of the gospel faith and Christian charity. Leo gets then this appropriate criteria from sacred scripture, and in this way he presented a methodology that would become characteristic of Christian social teaching. Rerum Novarum then dealt with the labor question using a methodology that would become a lasting paradigm for successive developments and for successive studies of emerging issues within our society. So this explains the document's prophetic character and its perennial validity, as it aims not so much to propose technical solutions to social problems, but rather guiding principles that can help to form consciences in response to the questions that arose at the time. With Rerum Novarum then, Pope Leo XIII began a wise and a thoughtful reflection in order to guide the measures that need to be taken from a humanistic and a Christian point of view. In fact, according to Martel et Magistra, which will come after this document several years later, Pope Leo XIII proclaimed a special message based on the requirements of human nature itself and in conformity with the precepts of the gospel and of reason. Two terms and elements which Pope Benedict XVI would make very current, for example, in his latest encyclical, Caritas in Veritate. The use of reason and the use of faith to deal with all the social problems that we face and which encounter us. In the era of the Industrial Revolution and the wars that followed shortly thereafter, human society was filled with so very many ideologies which sought to provide solution to the social problems that had emerged. Prevailing and on top of these ideologies which proposed different solutions were, of course, the socialism and liberal capitalism. Neither of these, according to Martel et Magistra, would become the paradigm which Pope Leo XIII would follow. But Pope Leo XIII would follow then the gospel and the tradition of the church to solve the problems which emerged from liberal capitalism, because he set aside socialism as a path not to walk and as a path not to follow. But the situation that the Pope set himself to address in his encyclical was a situation which later on, Centesimus Annus, a document which also came 100 years after Rerum Novarum, would present in these words. The new things to which the Pope devoted his attention were anything but positive. As described in the first paragraph of that encyclical, the new things which gave its name to the encyclical consisted in the following. The spirit of revolutionary change which had long been disturbing the nations of the world and which have passed beyond the sphere of politics and made its influence felt even in economic spheres. The progress of industry, the development of new trades, the changing relationships between employers and workers, employees, employers, and employees, the enormous wealth of few as opposed to the poverty of the many, the increasing self-reliance of workers and their closer association in unions, and the notable decline of morality. The Pope and the Church with him were confronted, as was the civil community at the time, by a society which was torn by a conflict all the more harsh and inhuman because it knew no rule or regulation. It was a conflict between capital and labor, or, as the encyclical itself would put it, it was a conflict about the worker question, the question about the worker. And the conflict of mere physical survival on one hand and opulence on the other. Therefore, the tendency to subscribe to extremist theories to solve the problem proved to be far worse than the evils that they try to solve. But these tendencies then were found to be very attractive by several sectors in society, and this tendency basically was socialism, the adoption of socialism as a solution to the problems that society was encountering. But as Martel and Magister would point out, the solution which was adopted tended to be worse than the evils that they tried to deal with. So then, Rerum Novarum, which the Pope promulgated as a solution to the situation, the new things in society, emerging currents of society, revitalized the traditional Christian commitment in favor of the poor, because it spurred many social activities by the ecclesial institutions and the individual faithful, and encouraged public authorities to take steps to improve the situation of workers. Moreover, the encyclical contributed to a better understanding of the church's right and duty to publicly teach faith and morals, including matters concerning social realities, and to indicate guidelines for authentic solutions to human problems. In those times, and in part also in our own day, a twofold approach prevailed. One directed to this world and this life, which proposed that faith ought to remain extraneous, and the other directed towards a purely otherworldly salvation, which neither enlightens nor directs existence on earth. These were two prevailing views. Consider religion as something that didn't have anything to do with the world, or concern the world as something that needed to go on without any religious guidance. The Pope's approach in publishing Rerum Novarum gave the Church, in the words of Martel et Magistra, a citizen status, the ability and the power to address the situations of the world in as far as they concern human existence. So what Pope Leo XIII proposed in this and other documents was a distinction between church and state, but without them being extraneous or opposed one to the other. The distinction had to be upheld without affirming any opposition, however, between church and state. And that meant that the Pope suggested that church could always come to work with state, just as faith could also work with reason. All of this invites us to make our own the words of Pope John Paul II, who wrote in his encyclical Centesimus Annus the following: I wish first and foremost to satisfy the depth of gratitude which the whole Church owes to this great Pope and his immortal document. I also hope to illustrate some of the vital energies that sprout from that root, which have not been exhausted yet with the passing of time, but rather have increased even more, and invite us all to continue the study which Pope Leo XIII had begun. In this sense, we wish to recall a statement with which we concluded the last meeting we had with the Catholic Charities. When we talk about the Church's social doctrine, it's not always a document that is written by the popes and the Holy Fathers. In fact, every social movement or every social group within the Church contributes towards the development of the Church's social doctrine. And every now and then, a papal encyclical, a papal document gives some formulation to it. But involved in the development of the Church's social doctrine is all of us, every Christian, and every movement within the Church, and every body that comes up to manifest the belief, Catholic faith, the faith in Christ, and Christian charity vis-a-vis the events in society. All of this invites us then to make the Pope's words our own, to consider the vital energies which sprout from the document and accept the challenge to study them further. It is up to us then to make sure that these vital energies will continue to grow and be fruitful. And this encourages us to take up Pope Leo XIII's teachings again in an up-to-date way, but with an appreciation for the original spirit which animated that teaching. In this sense, then, it is worthwhile to mention one criterion which the current Pope, Benedict XVI, has stressed in his homily. Having been invited and having to celebrate Mass in the home of, or the country, the village where Pope Leo XIII came from, on the 5th of September 2010, so Pope Leo XIII's birthplace, Pope Benedict XVI pointed this out, that Pope Pecci, which was his original name, Pope Pecci's deep religious feeling shone out through his words and actions and was also reflected in his magisterium. This came from knowing that he was called to pass on to the people of God wisdom, not abstract truths. In other words, a message that combines faith and life, truth and practical reality. These words of Pope Benedict XVI coincide perfectly with your own university motto, Deus lux mea est. In fact, the commitment to improve the world and society calls for the efforts to put God at the summit of our action because He is the light that guides us. This light which guides us reaches out through a twofold source, faith and human reason. The need to integrate faith and reason into our worldview and decision-making is very essential. And to this, Pope Benedict XVI devoted a lot of pages in his latest encyclical Caritas in Veritate. I will mention just some texts from the Caritas in Veritate illustrating this. For example, Pope Benedict XVI would say, charity is surely the fundamental energy to transform the world. But only in truth does charity shine forth. Only in truth can charity be authentically lived. Truth is the light that gives meaning and value to charity. And that light is both the light of reason and the light of faith, through which the intellect attains to the natural and supernatural truth of charity. In fact, reason and faith can come to each other's assistance, and only together will they save humanity. Entranced by an exclusive reliance on technology, reason without faith is doomed to founder in an illusion of its own omnipotence. And faith without reason risks being out of touch with everyday life. So what is needed is a fruitful dialogue and effective cooperation between faith and religious faith and reason. And any breach in this dialogue comes only at an enormous price to human development. In fact, the exclusion of God, or the exclusion of religion or exclusion of God, diminishes human development rather than enriching it. And the fact that reason is not enough and that it is necessary to allow faith to inform human knowledge never means, however, that reason is excluded, nor does faith contradict the results of reason. This light should not remain on a theoretical level. It also urges us to act in our world in order to improve upon it. So many passages from Rerum Novarum point out the need for this practical commitment. And one of these fundamental elements is the need for those who govern, the need for employers, the need for workers, as well as sacred ministers to put their hands to the work and not fail to share. In this regard, we'd just like to mention 5 points which illustrate how this light of faith and reason in the encyclical Rerum Novarum invite us to consider the challenges of faith and Christian charity to the emerging issues of our world. First, the dignity of every human person. Before the prevailing thought of his era, Pope Leo XIII brought about a real revolution, which some have described as Copernican revolution. It makes the worker and his eminent dignity the focal point of work. In this sense, it enunciates a basic principle that should preside over socioeconomic life. No man may with impunity outrage the human dignity which God himself treats with great reverence. This consideration has its foundation in the spiritual tradition of the person because the spirit has the divine image and likeness engraved on it, which supports this dignity. And consequently then, this dignity is common to all men. And in this respect, all men are equal. And there is here no difference then between the rich and the poor, the master and the servant, the ruler and the ruled. So as mentioned earlier then, although the social good should be viewed in a special way in terms of its spiritual and moral aspects, nevertheless, it is the business of a well-constituted body politic to see to the provision of those material and external help, the use of which is necessary to virtuous action. For this reason, Rerum Novarum, on the one hand, encourages material progress, and on the other hand, it teaches that such progress alone is not enough. In fact, when it is viewed as an end in itself, it risks becoming inhuman, because material growth by itself is ambivalent. So just as reason needs faith, earthly growth needs spiritual growth. And if human society is to be healed now, in no other way can it be healed save by a return to Christian life and Christian institutions and values. This is the constant teaching of the magisterium of the church, beginning with, again, Pope Leo XIII in Rerum Novarum. Of course, the key to reading the encyclical is the dignity of the worker as such, and for the same reason, the dignity of work. But in order to know and really protect this dignity, a transcendent view and an upright behavior are also needed. Because without God, man neither knows which way to go, nor even understand who he is. So the protection and the growth of every man's integral dignity continues to be a serious duty which we must all carry out in all our activities. And this is regardless of the situation in which people find themselves and the quality and the quantity of their possessions, poverty or wealth, health or sickness, age, and so on. The second element that the encyclical takes up is the theme of work. In Leo XIII and his doctrine, work gets a dignity that was not known until that encyclical was written. The prevailing ideologies at the time considered work as strictly a production force and as a mere merchandise, thus reducing it to its material and productive aspect. For this reason, the teaching of Rerum Novarum was very innovative. The teaching recalls that work is an important source of personal dignity and indeed a vocation established in the very creation of the human person. And so, it also constitutes an obligation. To work is a law of nature, one which is wrong to disobey. And work itself is part of man's vocation established in his very being as created by God. Moreover, work can have a supernatural value as obedience to a divine command. In fact, the encyclical's key teaching on this theme is the natural and the supernatural characteristic of all human work. This is considered a firm point of Christianity. Christ himself, being the Son of God, and God himself, chose to be considered the son of a carpenter. Nay, he chose not to disdain to spend a great part of his life as a carpenter himself. As a consequence of what has been said, all honest work, one's own and others, need to be given value, and all workers should carry it out with perfection, with upright intention, and in the service of God and in the service of the neighbor. Moreover, the corresponding rights need to be protected. And so Rerum Novarum indicates some of these rights which need to be protected, as for example, the limitation of working hours, legitimate rest, the different treatment of children and women, regarding the kind and the duration of work, a fair salary, and the possibility to carry out one's religious duties freely. Of course, working conditions almost all over the world have improved over the years, over these 120 years. However, as Pope John Paul II recalled, in the third world, context still exists, and certain objectives stated by Rerum Novarum still remain valid. And in some cases, these conditions still constitute a goal yet to be reached. If man's work and his very being are not to be reduced to the level of a mere commodity. And these objectives include a sufficient wage for the support of family, social insurance for old age and unemployment, and adequate protection for the conditions of employment. Third central point treated by the encyclical is labor unions. Another key theme of Pope Leo XIII's encyclical is labor unions. While many of his teachings were accepted without difficulty, at the end of the 19th century, there was ruthless opposition to labor unions. This is clear, among other things, from what Pius XI, in his encyclical Quadragesimo Anno, reports when he talks about Rerum Novarum. He says, to overcome these difficulties, Pope Leo XIII reaffirms the workers' right of association. The encyclical refers to the different associations formed by workers and then points this out. The most important of all are working men's unions, for these virtually include all the rest. And it is gratifying to know that these are actually in existence, not a few associations of this nature, consisting either of workmen alone or of workmen and employers together. But it were greatly to be desired that they should become more numerous and more efficient. Further on in his encyclical, Pope Leo XIII indicates that many of these societies are in the hands of secret leaders, and they are managed on principles ill according with Christianity and the public well-being. Accordingly, Pope Leo XIII will recommend that Christian labor unions should be created so that the unions are inspired by Christian values and Christian objectives. It should be mentioned nonetheless that Rerum Novarum acknowledges that it is not possible to describe in detail what the labor union organization should be. This depends on the nature of each group of persons, the nature of the experience and the customs of a place, and the quantity and the productivity of work, as well as other circumstances which prudence alone should suggest. Also, the acceptance of non-denominational labor unions were not really anticipated by Rerum Novarum, and this will be made prominent only in a later letter by the same Pope. In his letter Longinqua Oceani, a letter addressed to the United States, Pope Leo XIII then will send to the hierarchy of the United States the recommendation that some trade unions, in fact, can be interdenominational. This letter will recommend to the U.S. Bishops' Conference the possibility of Catholic labor unions, but acknowledge also that circumstances can justify the formation of non-denominational labor unions. The encyclical develops this theme further, like the others, characterized by the centrality of the human person. For the main objective of labor unions is to favor personal dignity in its totality. In today's context, this means that unions cannot be limited to their traditional functions. On the contrary, they need to adapt to the conditions of the contemporary context. And so, as Pope Benedict XVI would say, it is appropriate to recall how important it is that labor unions, which have always been encouraged and supported by the Church, should be open to the new perspectives that are emerging in the world of work, looking to wider concerns than the specific category of labor for which they were founded. Union organizations are called to address some of the new questions arising in our society. Pope Benedict goes on, the global context in which work takes place also demands that national labor unions, which tend to limit themselves to defending the interests of their registered members, should turn their attention to those outside their membership, and in particular to workers in developing countries where social rights are often violated. Papal magisterium about labor unions concerns not only the members of these unions, but how all persons and communities may be affected by such organizations. Recent controversies here in the United States, for example, in this regard illustrate the important aspects of collective bargaining and challenge both government and the unions themselves to ensure that authentic principles of justice, equity, and the respect for human dignity remain central to this collective bargaining. And it may well be also added that collective bargaining, in fact, may not also end up bargaining themselves out of existence. Care must be taken on both sides to resist greed and injustice so that labor unions may truly serve their function in facilitating the objective good of work and of workers. The fourth central theme of the encyclical is private property and its social function. At the beginning of the encyclical, after describing the workers' wretched conditions, the theme of private property is analyzed, and Pope Leo XIII brings together some arguments which point out the existence of the right to property. These arguments have human nature as their starting point and the unfavorable consequences of denying this right. Afterwards, the Supreme Pontiff would add, it is clear that the main tenet of socialism, community of goods, must be utterly rejected, since it only injures those whom it would seem meant to benefit, and is directly contrary to the natural rights of mankind, and would introduce confusion and disorder in the commonweal. Of course, Rerum Novarum does not affirm the right to property, private property, does not just affirm the right to private property. it also articulates the teaching that any property involves a social function. The encyclical demonstrates this with two arguments. First, the universal destination of the goods of the earth, the fact that God has given the earth for the use and enjoyment of the whole human race, can in no way be a bar to the owning of private property. For God has granted the earth to mankind in general, and the earth, even though apportioned among private owners, ceases not thereby to minister to the needs of all. Second argument of the Pope, the goal of private property, which is improvement of self and others, may not be forgotten. For whoever has received from the divine bounty a large share of temporal blessings, whether they be external or material, or gifts of the mind, has received them for the purpose of using them for the perfection of his own nature, and at the same time that he may employ them as the steward of God's providence for the benefit of others. With these two arguments, then, the Holy Father, Pope Leo XIII, develops in this encyclical Rerum Novarum the fact that on the one hand, upholding the right to private property, he also draws attention to the social function of private property, the well-being of the individual, the well-being of society. Consequently, private property cannot have an exclusively private end, but should also carry out its social purpose. In Rerum Novarum, then, Pope Leo XIII strongly affirmed the natural character of the right to private property, and while the Pope proclaimed the right to private ownership, he would also affirm with equal clarity that the use of goods, while marked by freedom, is subordinated to their original common destination as created goods, as well as to the will of Jesus Christ as expressed in the gospel. Here, then, is another aspect that should govern our own behavior: to protect the right to private property, and at the same time to make sure that this property fulfills its social purpose. The fifth central theme of the encyclical is the state's function towards workers and towards its members. A last point which I would wish to draw attention to or highlight in Rerum Novarum is the state's function. Although at the time the collectivist ideology was starting to make headway, in the industrialized countries, both political and economic laissez-faire prevailed. Leo XIII reaffirmed that the solution to the social problems calls for commitment of all actors in government and in civil society or civil sectors. He would say, doubtless, this most serious question demands the attention and the efforts of others besides ourselves, to wit, of rulers of states, of employers of labor, and of the wealthy, and indeed even of the working classes themselves. For this reason, the Pope hoped that the state would intervene, but not to the point that it will suffocate personal right. The foremost duty, therefore, of the rulers of the state should be to make sure that the laws and the institutions, the general character and the administration of the Commonwealth shall be such as of themselves to realize public well-being and private property. This is the proper scope of wise statesmanship and is the work of rulers. But a legal state structure is not enough to build the common good. This also calls for citizens' upright conduct and behavior. It's as if it's to say that godlike rulers require godly citizens. So without turning, into merely an ethical state, it should foster a virtuous life, since the end of society is to make men better, and the chief good that society can possess is virtue, godliness. Moreover, the common good has its foundation in the rights and the duties of persons. So Rerum Novarum stresses the priority of the person over the state, both regarding the individual, because a man precedes the state, and in the family. For as the domestic household, it is antecedent as well as in idea, as in fact, to the gathering of people in a community. The family must necessarily have rights and duties which are prior to those of the community and founded more immediately in nature. Consequently, then, the state must not absolve the individual or the family. Both should be allowed free and untrammeled action so far as it is consistent with the common good and the interest of others. All of this means both the inviolability of personal and family rights, as well as the subsidiarity of the functions of the state. The contention, then, that the civil government should at its option intrude into and exercise intimate control over family and over household is a great and a pernicious error. True, if a family finds itself in exceeding distress, utterly deprived of the counsel of friends, and without any prospect of extricating itself, it is right that extreme necessity be met by public aid, since each family is a part of the Commonwealth. The equal dignity of all and the harmony needed for society indicate that the state should act with equity regarding persons and human groups. Among the many and the grave duties of rulers who would do their best for the people, the first and the chief function is to act with strict justice. With that justice, which is called distributive, towards each and every class alike. This does not remove the obligation to take special care of the neediest. Indeed, this preference is an integral part of the state's duties. Rights must be religiously respected wherever they exist, and it is the duty of the public authority to prevent and to punish injury and to protect everyone in the possession of his own will. Still, when there is a question of defending the rights of individuals, the poor and the badly off have a claim to special consideration. A repetition, then, of the Church's age-old doctrine of preferential option for the poor. So the functions, then, of public powers have been evolving for a long time. In fact, as Benedict XVI would recall, Populorum Progresso, the encyclical of Pope, was applying on a global scale the insights and the aspirations contained in Rerum Novarum, written when, as a result of the Industrial Revolution, the idea was first proposed, somewhat ahead of its time, that the civil order, for its self-regulation, also needed intervention from the state for purposes of redistribution. Not only is this vision threatened today by the way in which markets and societies are opening up, but it is evidently insufficient to satisfy the demands of a fully humane economy. What the Church's social doctrine has always sustained on the basis of its vision of man and society is corroborated today by the dynamics of globalization. The main function, then, of the state are thus emphasized both in Leo XIII's era and at the present time: pursuit of the common good, which is not reduced to one nation, but considered from a world standpoint. Awareness that all of the universe and all of humanity have a share in the common will of the earth. Awareness that this good cannot be limited to material goods, but must include the moral good of the society. And so, by way then of concluding, the current moment calls for renewed efforts to fulfill these demands which Pope Leo XIII has set forth. Leo XIII has outlined these same demands in Rerum Novarum. Putting them into practice has become the burden of our day. And once again, the necessary road to building a society based on the evangelical designs that actually reflect the motto of this great university should always be, God is my light, Deus lux mea. And that this light, under the influence of the gospel and reason, should lead to the discovery of the basic values of the Christian gospel: respect for human rights, respect for the nature of work and labor, respect for the need for labor and capital to come together to fashion development, and respect for the state's own tutelage of the well-being of all members in society. Lux Deus lux mea est is the motto of this university, and may the light of God continue to guide the development of society and the relationship between labor and capital. I thank you for your kind attention.
I need my glasses. Thank you very much for the introduction that you gave, Steve, and my sincere thanks to the Catholic University of America for organizing this timely conference and for inviting me to participate. What a joy to hear Cardinal Turkson, his voice so filled with passion for workers and their families. His words so clear and unequivocal in reminding us of the historic context as well as the timelessness of Pope Leo XIII's revolutionary encyclical. We thank him not only for his call for a renewal of commitment to Rerum Novarum and more than a century of Catholic social teachings, but for reaffirming what a succession of popes have endorsed. As he recalled the dire circumstances that compelled the creation of Rerum Novarum 120 years ago, I could not help but note the parallels between the human misery being created then by the Industrial Revolution and the situation we're facing today as the new information revolution sweeps across our world. The vast expansion of industrial pursuits and the marvelous discoveries of science in that era have been exceeded manyfold in our time, and the impact of untrammeled capitalism and free trade, now as then, has changed relations between master and workman, to the detriment of working men and women around the globe. Here in America, we are struggling to emerge from an economic collapse caused, on the one hand, by the reckless actions of unregulated corporations and financial institutions. And on the other hand, by a failed system of labor management governance that has transferred enormous amounts of wealth and power from those who have too little to those who already have too much. In Caritas in Veritate, Pope Benedict XVI reminded us of the need to stand vigilant against the threat of unfettered capitalism when he wrote, "The market is not and must not become the place where the strong subdue the weak." In an invocation delivered to our AFL-CIO Building and Construction Trades Department Union's legislative conference earlier this year, Father Cletus Kiley dramatized our plight when he condemned the Wall Street gamblers who crippled our economy, took obscene bonuses, tried to blame unions and the middle class, blamed the immigrants, then demonized our public sector unions. Father Kiley was responding to a recent all-out attack by right-wing politicians on public employees and their unions in Wisconsin. But the truth is that for the past 30 years, anti-union private sector employers in our country have been waging an all-out war against workers. They've denied workers the right to freely form and join unions by harassing, intimidating, and discriminating against union supporters, actually firing union activists in 1/3 of all organizing campaigns. They've subverted collective bargaining by threatening to close or relocate plants if workers won't agree to wage and benefit concessions, then permanently replacing workers who strike to defend their contracts. The result is that union membership in our country has declined steadily, along with much of the power workers need to protect their rights. Today in America, we have the widest wage and wealth gap of any industrialized nation in the world. Today in America, the average corporate executive earns 340 times what the average worker earns. Today in America, more than 25 million of our people either cannot find jobs or are underemployed. In Wisconsin, a newly elected conservative state government took America's anti-union, anti-worker crusade a step further. This isn't a struggle over wages, health care, and pension benefits. The workers and their unions agreed to those concessions. This is a struggle by workers to preserve their right to come together in unions and collectively bargain for a better life. Now public employee union crushing has marched into 24 other states. If unchecked, this assault on the existence of unions is sure to spread, and the impact on Catholic social teachings and the moral and economic fiber of our nation will be profound. It is particularly distressing that many of the governors, legislators, and business leaders involved in these assaults are Catholics who are ignoring the encyclical we celebrate today. In doing so, they ignore not only the ethical dimension of Catholic social teaching, but its spiritual dimension. Work is the principal way we all participate in God's plan for us and his ongoing act of creation. Yet this fundamental concept is hardly mentioned in Catholic dogma, sermons, or publications. No wonder that some lay Catholics see workers' rights as subservient to market matters and unions as political opponents to be eliminated. We must remind them that Pope Leo XIII left no room for equivocation or exception when he wrote, "The state has for its office to protect natural rights, not to destroy them, and if it forbid its citizens to form associations, it contradicts the very principle of its own existence. And we must reinforce what our U.S. Catholic bishops wrote in Economic Justice for All in 1986, and I quote, "No one can deny the right to organize without attacking human dignity itself. Therefore, we oppose organized efforts such as those regrettably now seen in our country to break existing unions and prevent workers from organizing." Recently, Archbishop Rerum, president of the Wisconsin Catholic Conference, responded to our struggle by writing to members of the state legislature, "Hard times do not nullify the moral obligations each of us has to respect the legitimate rights of workers." But there were other Catholic leaders in Wisconsin who disagreed with the Archbishop and declared the Church should be neutral in the conflict, a decision that concerns me greatly and prompts my remarks this evening. We are grateful when my co-responder, Bishop Blair, supported Archbishop Listecki and wrote, "Catholic teaching and your statement reminds us that these are not just political conflicts or economic choices. They are moral choices with enormous human dimensions. But we need even more from the American Church if we are to rescue our families from a society that insists they should accept crumbs from the table of life and have no say in the decisions affecting them at work." My feeling is that we need to restore Catholic social teaching to the center of the American Church. If the American labor movement is to survive, we need to renew and strengthen the partnership between the Church and labor. We need to create a louder, quicker, more universal Catholic voice so we can confront the greed of the giant corporations that have become our ruling class. We need to launch a new program for joint outreach to the Latino, Asian, African, and other immigrants who are tomorrow's Americans and who yearn for our help. We need to implement a new and thorough education program based on Rerum Novarum, one that reaches into every seminary, every diocese, and every parish in America. These are the challenges facing us, and we thank God for leaders like Cardinal Turkson. We thank God for all his great work. We also thank God for Archbishop Blair and his wonderful leadership. And we are helping and we are working together. And I thank all of you for being here. God bless you all.
Before coming over here tonight, I received an email that said that dinner will be at 8:45 and that we have to leave 20 minutes before that, and be sure you're done by that time. I'll do the best that I can. Cardinal Peter Turkson eloquently developed the legacy of Rerum Novarum by inviting us to listen with an historical and a contemporary ear to the message of this great encyclical given to the Church by Pope Leo XIII in 1891. His comments have challenged us to address contemporary issues with principles of justice, equity, and respect for human dignity. Thank you, Your Eminence, for this very fine presentation. Rerum Novarum, as the Cardinal so well expressed, has been a foundational point of reference for all subsequent papal social encyclicals which have built upon its principles. I would like to briefly comment on three current aspects of Catholic social teaching which find their roots in Rerum Novarum: care for the poor, the rights of workers, and the role of the Church. Pope Leo was responding to the concrete situations of his time, which had given birth to the Industrial Revolution and the rise of industrial capitalism. A few enjoyed massive wealth, while the masses were poverty-stricken. Workers were easily identified with the poor and widely exploited while being exposed to harsh working conditions. Leo was influenced to speak by the Catholic social movements of Europe. The Cardinal reflected on that in his presentation on the importance of the social movements going on amongst the people in the Church at large before they ever become articulated in an encyclical. A very, I thought, wonderful insight. So Leo was influenced by the Catholic social movements of Europe, and in response to a request from Cardinal Gibbons and other American bishops to address the morality of land and labor issues. Leo was adamantly opposed to socialism, but at the same time saw the need for strictures on laissez-faire capitalism in order to safeguard the common good and protect the rights of workers, which meant the rights of the poor. We live 120 years later, but so many of today's major challenges are not dissimilar. The current revolution is a technological one. Global poverty envelops the earth. Millions are unemployed. Working conditions around the globe are often deplorable. Church-state relationships, in many instances, are adversarial. Today in the Church, we speak of the preferential option for the poor. Now, Leo, of course, did not know this term, but he certainly engaged its root idea when he wrote, "When there is a question of defending the rights of individuals, the poor and badly off have a claim to a special consideration." In the current drama on Capitol Hill, the bishops seek to persuade and influence Congress and the administration to give priority in consideration to the poor and the vulnerable in budget and financial reform. The poor have no lobbyists with huge bank accounts to speak for them. They have only the religious organizations and those associations who work on their behalf. Rerum Novarum calls for the power of the ruler, and we can easily translate that term ruler to government officials or legislators, to promote to the utmost, he said, the interests of the poor. It seems to me that before we cut budgets or diminish programs or increase revenue, we need, as a nation, to line up our priorities, to be clear about what we believe in and stand for. Then we can approach fiscal responsibility guided by our values, of which first come the poor and the vulnerable. This past week, an unprecedented coming together of Christian churches and organizations, including the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, gave voice to defending the lives and the dignity of those who are poor and vulnerable. Over 40 Christian leaders signed the Circle of Protection, a statement which enunciated that, quote, a just framework for future budgets cannot rely on disproportionate cuts in essential services to poor persons. It requires shared sacrifice by all, including raising revenues, eliminating unnecessary military and other spending, and addressing the long-term costs of health insurance and retirement programs fairly. There are those who say the church should stick to spiritual matters and stay out of the economy and the political. In terms of respecting the political order and the economic order, they are correct. But in terms of being a moral voice, listen to what Leo said. Neither must it be supposed that the solicitude of the church is so preoccupied with the spiritual concerns of her children as to neglect their temporal and earthly interests. We build upon the admonitions of Rerum Novarum that the church has the responsibility to educate citizens, to act justly, and to promote social reconciliation between rich and poor, labor and capital. In Rerum Novarum, caring for the poor and promoting the rights of workers are virtually identical. In fact, Leo stated that the more that was done for the benefit of the working classes by the general laws of the country, the less need there would be to seek special means to relieve them. The poor have a natural right, like everyone else, to procure what is required in order to live. Leo sees no other way for the poor to do this than by what they earn through their work. Jobs with living wages clearly reduce poverty. Right? Yes. Among the rights of workers in Rerum Novarum, the right to a just wage and the right to join workers' associations are key. However, we must exercise some caution by not thinking that Pope Leo saw these rights in exactly the same way we do today. There's been a lot of development in the social teaching of the church, and circumstances have changed. But what he did give future generations was the foundation for contemporary application and development of the church's social teaching. Leo describes the just wage very simply as sufficient to enable the worker comfortably to support himself, his wife, and his children. The worker is not a commodity given some kind of predetermined wage for production or output, as if his work had nothing to do with the fact that he is a human being and that work is necessary for him to live. Every individual, every worker wants to better his condition in life physically, spiritually, and materially. And John Sweeney, I think, developed this whole idea of the work and workers' associations in today's situation very, very well. Vatican II put it this way: remuneration for work should guarantee man the opportunity to provide a dignified livelihood for himself and his family on the material, social, cultural, and spiritual level, taking into account the role and productivity of each, the state of the business, and the common good. Church always tries to present its teaching in a balanced way that looks at the whole picture. I see John Carr back there, and he always says it's always in the church a both and that's true as we approach all these very difficult issues. I think it fair to say that a just wage at minimum enables a family to live decently, to meet the ordinary expenses of daily life, and to build a savings. The term living wage is often used to encompass the idea of a just remuneration, which includes wages and benefits necessary for a basically comfortable existence. The determination and the application of a living wage in today's society of complex relationships in different situations requires a lot of prudence and much prayerful discernment. But without just compensation for work, will we ever reduce poverty in this country or in the world? To help the individual worker to attain a just wage and to be treated as a human being created by God, Rerum Novarum promotes the right to form associations, the most important being, quote, a working man's union, close quotes. The Pope, in the beginning of his encyclical, lamented the disappearance of working men's guilds and the loss of the protection they offered. He lays out the reason for the encyclical, what he found as the reality of the worker, surrendered, isolated, and helpless to the hard-heartedness of employers and the greed of unchecked competition. Not all employers, of course, are hard-hearted. There are many just employers who pay good salaries and provide substantial benefits. Neither is all competition greedy and unchecked, although it is hard to restrain a competitive spirit that more often than not seeks to crush and eliminate the competitor. The point, though, is this, that without a working man's union, the workers do not have an organization to protect them and support them. Today's union membership, again as John Sweeney pointed out, is at an all-time low, and collective bargaining is on the chopping block. I believe that unions are necessary, as they always have been, to protect and strengthen workers. I believe that collective bargaining is necessary for the good of employer and employee. But I do think that new ways of labor management relationships have to be developed, and that while they may be adversarial, need to be more respectful and more dialogical in a mutual search together for the common good. Conflicts, of course, have to be negotiated out. At times, it has been difficult for the church, who supports the right of workers to organize, when some unions have taken public positions which the church cannot support, and many union members may not agree with. The church understands that there can and will be areas of difference and disagreement on specific issues. It can happen that the church may judge in a particular instance that a union has gone beyond their purpose of protecting, supporting, and strengthening workers in the workplace to be an advocate on other issues that do not appear to affect directly the well-being of the worker in the workplace. Be that as it may, Pope Benedict in Caritas in Veritate has re-emphasized and enhanced the position of Leo XIII. He says, the repeated calls issued within the Church's doctrine, beginning with Rerum Novarum, for the promotion of workers' associations that can defend their rights, must therefore be honored today even more than in the past. He further chides governments who, for reasons of economic utility, often limit the freedom or the negotiating capacity of labor unions. When unemployment is high, when people are unemployed, when remuneration is inadequate or unjust, poverty results. The unemployed worker who does not have adequate reserves is placed with his or her family in a condition of insecurity. And even with sufficient reserves for the present, there is the uncertainty of what tomorrow might bring. Pope Benedict feels the pain of the unemployed when he writes, being out of work or dependent on public or private assistance for a prolonged period undermines the freedom and creativity of the person and his family and social relationships, causing great psychological and spiritual suffering. Let me conclude my remarks by saying that the great legacy of Rerum Novarum is that the Church is on the side of the poor. And at the heart of her mission is charity, love, agape. The charity that Leo XIII described as the devotedness and self-sacrifice of Christian charity, which cannot be replaced by any other human expedient. The charity described by Pope Benedict as at the heart of the Church's social doctrine. It is love which honors the dignity of work as participation in the act of God's creation. And it is love which values the dignity of the worker, not just for the work he or she does, but above all for the person he or she is. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, what an extraordinary series of events we've had over the last 2 days, and what absolutely magical discussions or lectures we've heard this evening. Please, everyone, join me in congratulating once again Bishop Blair for his extraordinary comments. Mr. John Sweeney for his response. And above all, please let us all thank Cardinal Turkson for his extraordinary address. This concludes our conference on the 120th anniversary of Rerum Novarum. Thank you all very much. Please stay with us, though. There will be more to come on this theme in the future. Thank you all, and good evening.